All right, Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I'm going to call this meeting now to order. It's a meeting of the Subdivision and Appeal Board. My name is Graham Locke, and I will be the chair for this hearing. Please direct all questions and answers and comments through the chair. I'd ask the board members to now introduce themselves, perhaps starting with Mr. Scott, then Mr. Bell, then Ms. Mara.
Harry Scott.
Jim Bell.
You're muted.
Apologies. Karen Mara.
Thank you, Karen. And the clerk for this hearing today is Miss Katie Bravo Stewart. And before introducing the appeal, I would now ask the members of town's administration in attendance today to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Bjorgi. I am a planning technician and I am the file manager for this application.
Thank you, Mr. Bjorgi.
Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Miller. I'm the manager of planning and development here with the town, and we are the department responsible for the issuance of development permits.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Are there any other attendees from the town?
Jolene Noel, I'm the meeting administrator.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Noel. Are there, looking at the agenda then, board members, do you have, and clerk, do you have any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda as provided? None?
Through the chair, I have none.
Okay, hearing that, I then move that the board adopt the agenda as circulated as amended. All those in favor, please signify. Thank you. Unanimous. Okay, now we'll move to the introduction of the appeal. This appeal, just by way of introduction, is an appeal number PL 2022-0506 regarding a height variance. Previously, I think previously approved by the development officer and now appealed to the Subdivision and Appeal Board. I would now ask the appellant, I think it's Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker, to identify themselves to the board.
Hello, it's Paul Stoliker here.
I'm Nola Stoliker.
Thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker. And looking at the members of the board, are there any objections that you have to the members of the board from any prior things?
Not at all.
Not at all, thank you. Have you folks received the entire package of materials associated with this?
Yeah, we downloaded about a 50-page document that was emailed to us. Yeah.
Right, that is.
Yeah. I've got it in front of me now.
Thank you very much. Okay, the hearing. I think we'll proceed with the hearing. Then the hearing process today is going to go as follows. Administration will make a summary presentation of the matter before the board, and then the board will then ask questions of the administration to make sure they understand the administration's presentation. Then we would ask Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker or their agent to speak in favor of the appeal that they have made. And then we would then ask the appellant questions of their presentation. Those speaking in favor, if there are more of them, more folks speaking in favor of the appeal, we would, and I don't believe there are any more, but if there are, we would ask them to identify themselves and speak at that point as well. Then those speaking in opposition to the appeal, we would give them a chance to speak to the opposition to the appeal, and we would then ask questions of those parties. And there, I don't think there are any parties who have identified themselves who take a neutral position, but should they materialize, we would seek their information as well. We would then ask for clarification or closing remarks from the appellant. that would be Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker. And we would ask for clarification or closing remarks from the town staff.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
just to clarify, there is, so the appellant has filed an appeal against the approval for the subject application. However, there are the applicant's spokespersons present. The applicants are separate from the appellants. So there will be applicants spokespersons, which is Raphael Spinner and Ryan Kovacs, which with HSS Designs that will be speaking towards the application as well.
correct. Thank you for that correction, Ms. Stewart. That's great. Thank you. Then at that point, once the town staff have presented their closing remarks, we'll just state that the purpose of the hearing is for the appellant and affected parties to provide the board with information to the appeal, and we will base our decision on the planning merits as outlined a moment ago, and affected parties will be given an opportunity to speak. All speakers will ensure that all comments are directed through the board chair. And again, all comments must be of proper decorum and succinct. If another point has been raised by another party, just simply state that you agree with that point and move on. If any person presenting is referring to a written document, including a map, we need to make sure those documents, if they're not already with the clerk, have been filed with the clerk. Once the board closes the public portion of the hearing and goes in camera, we will review all of the information that is provided to us, and we will make then a board written decision within 15 days of the hearing. Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker, do you as appellant have any concerns with the process as outlined?
No, process is fine.
Thank you very much. Does the applicant have any issues or concerns with the process as outlined? They are online, are they? Yes.
No, we don't have any problems with the procedure.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that in mind, then could I ask the development officer to make the presentation with respect to this appeal that the town has prepared?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Subdivision and Development Appeals Board, to those of the public in attendance and those watching via the town's live stream today. I have a presentation prepared, which I will pull up on your screen shortly. So I'm the file manager for this application, and I'm here to present today the application for a renovation and addition at 302 Larch Place. Starting with the statutory requirements, this outlines the dates of approval, the appeal being received, as well as communications to the appellants and applicants. The statutory requirements are deemed to have been met in this case. To give an overview of the application, it is a proposed renovation and second-story addition to an existing manufactured dwelling, which is a permitted use in the MHR district. The application includes a variance to the maximum height regulations for the addition. The permit was approved, including the variance to height, and in consideration of the application, the passive solar design, the aesthetic value of the addition were deemed to be of community benefit. The applicant was advised as part of the application to communicate with adjacent neighbors regarding the project, and I note that no responses were received to the notice of application. And we only heard from the neighbors after the decision was made. Overview of the property, you can see Larch Place and Larch Avenue with 302 Larch outlined in blue. The zoning districts, this 300 Larch Place is within the manufactured home residential district with, you can see environmentally protected districts surrounding, but essentially within a larger MHR district. This is a view of the property looking east from 300 Larch Place as it exists today. So the relevant background we looked at in reviewing this application, the land use bylaw regulations within the MHR district, including the maximum height of 6.5 meters. The details of how we apply that maximum of 6.5 to a particular property is outlined in section 2.8 in building height. The variance authority in this case is on the maximum height of a building is 10% maximum towards the development officer, and the criteria we consider are listed in section 1.14. The green building requirements in section 10, specifically that a addition and renovation to an existing dwelling is exempt from green building requirements. So what's being proposed in this case is over and above what the bylaw requires. The municipal development plan does encourage sustainable and energy efficient building techniques, as well as outlines goals of encouraging gradual redevelopment of existing residential neighborhoods in ways that fit in with the existing neighborhood. The Municipal Government Act outlines the procedure for decisions on permitted uses, as well as decisions of the Subdivision and Development Appeals Board. So getting into the scope and specifics of the proposal itself, this is a excerpt from the application. You can see the existing front facade on the left and the proposed front facade on the right. See some substantial exterior renovations, changes to windows, changes to the roof form on the right side of the building, as well as the second story addition towards the left side of the home. The site plan view of the proposal, there is no proposed changes to the building footprint. They're working within the existing building footprint, with the exception of a front deck at the front of the property. The proposed second story addition, I've just highlighted in blue to show where that sits in relation to the rest of the building footprint. So the full land use bylaw review is in attachment 3 in my staff report. As I mentioned, there is no change to the building footprint, so there isn't a lot of development standards to apply in this case. It is the maximum building height, which is the focal point of the review. In this case, the requested variance amounts to 0.5 meter above the bylaw standard, which works out to 7.9% in our calculations. I would note that in the processing of this application, we had initially noted it as 10%, but on further review of the application as part of preparing for the appeal, those numbers were refined, as there was a portion of the building which was counted in maximum height, the eave specifically, which according to our bylaws is exempt from the maximum height regulation. So to illustrate the maximum height and the variance that's being requested in this case, I've marked up the applicant's elevation view of the front of the property. You can see when we apply the formulas in 2.8 of the land use bylaw, using the existing site grades and using the 6.5 maximum, it gives us a geodetic maximum of 1319.3, which actually works out to 6.3 meters above grade. So that is the maximum height that they are expected to work with according to the land use bylaw. What they've proposed in this case works out to 1319.8 in geodetic. So that's a half a meter above. And that is measured to the peak of the roof and does not include this eave overhang. So that accounts for the discrepancy between the 10% initially as it was measured and the actual maximum height of 1319.8. Also note there's a small corner of the new building roof on the main level that is outside of the maximum building envelope, which is sketched in blue here. And that is also required to be within the envelope. And for a portion at the front, it is not, as it's part of the roof structure versus being part of the eave, which is exempt, but still within the half a meter variance that is being requested. So looking at the variance criteria specifically in the land use bylaw, it asks us to look at public benefit and site conditions constraining reasonable development. And this is applied generally when we look at any proposed variance. In this case, we had a desire to encourage the proposed energy efficiency upgrades. In this case, the orientation of the addition to maximize solar gain, as well as the thicker building envelopes that are required for this type of construction to increase the height of these structures. The sloped versus the flat roof. So in theory, they could have went with a flat roof design for this project. That may not have achieved the energy efficiency, the solar orientation that they were looking for. And also looking at the remainder of the building, the roof slopes wouldn't have fit in with the slopes on the rest of the dwelling. And also noting that working with an existing dwelling presents some restraints in terms of your ability to control the final elevation of an addition when compared to constructing a new building, for example. When looking at height variances specifically, the land use bylaw asks us to look at the impact to neighboring properties, specifically the use, enjoyment, safety, aesthetics, value, access to light, privacy, and protection of views. Unfortunately, as we didn't hear from any public feedback during the notice of application stage prior to decision, we didn't have an opportunity to review any alternate options or review this in depth with the neighbors. But we would note that the addition is set back towards the middle of the site. There could be other proposed additions to this dwelling, which would site an addition much closer to the property line, which could have a greater impact to views and access to light, that kind of thing. And in our assessment, the additional 0.5 meters of height is reasonable. It has justification and is deemed to have a marginal impact and not an undue impact on these factors listed above. Our recommendation after review of this development application is to approve, and our conditions are attached in attachment 6 of the staff report, which include the adjustments to the actual maximum height of this application. The board's options in this case are to either approve the application subject to the conditions we've suggested, approve the application with alternate conditions, refuse the application, or postpone submitting pending submission of additional details. That concludes my presentation, and now happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bjorga. Board members, questions of Mr. Bjorga? Yes, Mr. Bell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through the chair, Mr. Bjorga, I'm just wondering, is there at some point where renovation and addition potentially changes the use from a manufactured home to another type of dwelling in this district?
Yes, thank you for the question through the chair. There is a point where renovations and additions are to the extent that it is essentially a new building, a new dwelling. That threshold is 75% of new construction. That's not written in our bylaws, but there is support for that in the MGA when you're looking at non-conforming buildings, as well as some other provincial legislation that uses that threshold to determine when a renovation becomes a brand new building. Our sense in this case is that it has not crossed that 75% threshold of new construction.
Okay, thank you for that.
Ms. Mara, any questions? Mr. Scott? I just had one point of clarification just to make sure that we are reading it right. Is the property that has filed the appeal, you pointed out, or it is pointed out on one of the, I think it's the plot plan that you provided, Mr. Bjorga. Can you bring that plot plan back up?
Just one moment.
Yeah, that's
this one.
Yeah, I'm just wondering here, is that a two-story building that's there, or is it a one-story building? You show two-story buildings on both sides, but there's only a one-story building on the one side as I look at the diagrams.
Yes, I believe that's correct. That may be this was the site plan provided by the applicant. I believe the property to the north is in fact a single story, but the property to the south is a two-story.
Yeah, I don't think anything turns on it, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me just take a quick look here. I think that concludes our questions then, Mr. Bjorga. Thank you for your presentation today. I'll now ask Mr. and Mrs. I have it right here, sorry. Stoliker to make their presentation in support of their appeal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, the question, will I be able to have Mr. Bjorgi put up some of the pages from the appeal or the package as I'm talking, so we can talk about some of those, we can see the images while I'm talking about them?
Yeah, Mr. Bjorga, that would be helpful if, I'm sure you can do that just by sharing your screen when Mr. Stoliker identifies.
Okay, I'll be able to identify which page I would like him to put up if that's possible.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Bjorga?
Sure, just maybe give me 1 minute to get set up here. But I'll pull up the package right away.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I have a fairly lengthy presentation I'd like to make, so hopefully you'll bear with me and I'll try not to make it too long. On opening, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this appeal. As you know, we're appealing only the height variance. And we acknowledge that the applicant, our neighbor, Mr. Raphael Spinner, has applied for this variance in good faith and with the intention of bettering the design of the intended renovation to the property. We have no grievances with him or his family, have considered them friends in the past, and hope to continue a friendly relationship in the future. We simply feel that the variance should not have been granted, as I will try to explain. Anyhow, that's okay. Okay, so I would like to consider 4 points. First off, the definition of building height. Secondly, calculation of building height, which I will disagree with Mr. Bjorgi on 1 point on that. Comments on the applicant's written submission to the SDAB. And finally, variance powers of the Development Authority. So going on to the first point, definition of building height. The LUB section 13 defines what is meant by building height. And I will read that for you. It says it means the vertical distance between any ground point as defined in the bylaw and the highest point of a building, excluding a number of things such as skylights, steeples, chimneys, etc. There is no exclusion for eaves. It is clear from this definition that any extension of the roof that is considered an eave should be taken into consideration as part of the height of the building. And I'll speak a little bit more on that in a future point. What this would mean is that the actual roof height that's accepted by the planning staff is lower than what we believe it actually is. Not by a lot, but I'd like to get that straight in the record. So in summary, building height is the highest point of a building with some exceptions, but eaves are not one of the exceptions. Okay, going on to calculation of building height. There are 2 methods of calculating the building height. Oh, before I get into this, I should just say as background, I was a land surveyor for the town, in the town of Canmore for many, many years. And I've worked with the bylaw for all those years, and I'm fairly familiar with it. I have reacquainted myself with it, the parts that are relevant to this carefully in the last couple of days. So I speak from some experience here. So there are 2 methods calculating the building height shown in the LUB. However, as per LUB section 2.8.2.2, for the proposed building design in this case, only the building envelope model must be used. Now, the applicant talks a little bit about calculation using the other method of roof height. That's a red herring. That it's totally irrelevant to the application. Only the building envelope calculation should be considered. Now, if you could look at page 16 of the package, if we can have Mr. Bjorgi put that up. It's page 16 of the package and page 3 of the staff report. So Mr. Bjorgi pointed this out already, and he's talking about the number 1319.8, which is the top of the red triangle. If he could point to that with his pointer. Yeah. Okay, so the applicant and the planning department have both interpreted this definition in a way that excludes the extension of the roof beyond the vertical plane of the south building wall. This is, in our opinion, simply incorrect. Anyone looking at the building plans, looking at that picture we're seeing there, would consider the building height to be the highest point of the roof, the point at the top of the eave. And the land use bylaw definition supports this. as I've read to you, the definition has no exception for ease. Land use bylaw section 2.8.4.1 is the first paragraph of the explanation of the building envelope model. And I will read that for you. Okay, so, and I think this section is confusing planning staff. It says, all of the building structures shall be contained within the building envelope, with the exception of the residential projections detailed in section 2.4.3. Well, 2.4.3 is a list of projections into yard setbacks. They have nothing to do with the height whatsoever. So some might argue that this paragraph that I just read implies that the extension of the roof beyond the building envelope model limits can be ignored in the building height calculation. However, LUB section 243 is intended to apply only to horizontal extensions. And per that 243, it projections into yard setbacks, nothing to do with heights. Therefore, the building height must be measured to the highest point of the roof. So that's my argument for measuring the building height to the top point of the eave there. And so that's a difference of opinion between myself and the planning staff in what should be the height of the building. Okay, so the applicant has made a calculation of the height of various points of the roof above ground level. The maximum allowed height is 6.31. The applicant talks about a maximum height of conditioned space at 6.8, which is that's the purple line, I think. Is it? Anyhow.
Yeah.
And the highest point of the roof is 6.91. We do not dispute these numbers. For later discussion, we need to consider geodetic elevations. That's the height above sea level, so that we can compare the heights of the roofs of the adjacent houses. So if you add the ground level, which if Mr. Bjorgi can point out 13.0 at the natural ground there, that's a height above sea level of the ground. If you add that to those numbers in red, you will get that the highest point of the roof is 1319.91. And the applicant is calling the roof height, maximum roof height, is 1319.8. So there's a difference of 11 centimeters, which is about 4 inches. So it's kind of a smallish amount, but it's still a point that I want to make clear. So based on the definition of building height in the LUB, any reference to the value of 1319.8 or 6.8 measured from 0 being the ground as building height is just incorrect and should be ignored when you're reading the applicant's submission. Using the height of 1319.91 to the peak of the roof, the variance is 0.6 meters, which gives a variance of 9.5%. Okay, on to comments on the applicant's written submission to the SDAB. I went carefully through the applicant's submission, and I have 9 points that I'd like to make that are kind of errors or muddy water in his application, maybe parts that aren't relevant to a roof height variance. So on page 6, and I don't know if Mr. Bjorgi wants to put this up, we could if he wants. On page 6, and this is page 6 of the submission of the SDAB package. Yeah, page 6, The applicant calculates possible variances and variance percentages in the third paragraph. And it's incorrect because he has applied the building height calculation incorrectly. And also, as mentioned before, any mention that he makes of the alternate H-max formula for calculating roof height is irrelevant. He stresses that his roof height isn't too bad because of comparing to the H-max formula, but that should totally be ignored because it's not relevant in this case. And on page 6, as I've already mentioned that, so I'll skip that one. Okay, on page 7, if you go to the second bullet on page 7, on the second bullet, you can see he's got, on the last line, he's talking about roof heights of 1313.19 and 1313.25. Well, those are just wrong numbers. Like, I don't know how he got them. I think they must have been a typographic error or something, but that's almost ground grade. So he obviously hasn't gone carefully through his submission to make sure all his numbers are correct. Just wanted to point that out because I found that confusing at first, and I'm sure that the SDAB board members are going to wonder what's going on in that too. Just know those two numbers there are just wrong. Okay. On page 7 in the third bullet, the applicant correctly mentions that 301 Larch is a two-story building, and there was a question about that from the board. Our house on 303 Larch is a bungalow. We have about 4 feet of our basement sticking out of the ground, and then one main floor. On the other side, in 301 Larch, it is a two-story building, and the applicant points that out. And that is it, and that because it's a two-story building, it contradicts what we said in our comments on the appeal form. But he does not mention that in contrast to the proposed development, 301 Larch is a slab on grade, and it has no building height relaxation. On page 7, bullet number 4, the applicant talks about the need for higher clear story windows on the south elevation. Now, he implies an argument that a height variance is required so that the addition is high enough so that the 301 Larch roof does not block sunlight from penetrating proposed clear story windows. And I commend him for trying to have passive solar energy, but I don't think that's a good enough reason to warrant the height variance. Anyhow, he has not provided any proof in the way of a sun angle study or other that a height variance is necessary to allow sun coming in through the clear story windows. In fact, the sunlight will certainly be blocked mostly by the mountains, the Hall-Lane Massif and Mount Rundle. They are much higher than the roof on 301 Larch, and they are going to obstruct the sun for the majority of the day. Okay, the next point, on page 7 and 8, the remaining bullets, in the remaining bullets, the applicant is trying to appeal to the town's desire for green build development. But we do not believe that this is a valid argument for granting a variance. I commend him on green build, but it should not sway any decision in terms of a variance. Okay, now here's a big one. On page 9, if Mr. Bjorge could go to page 9. On the bottom there. Okay, so that bottom sketch there is purported to be a drawing that shows what the finished development is going to look like, as far as I can tell from reading this submission. Well, that is just totally bogus picture. It's just totally wrong. The proposed renovation will be higher than both of the adjacent homes. And further to that, on page 12, you can just leave that picture up there. If Mr. Bjorgi could leave that picture up there, that would be great. On page 12, if we add the roof peak elevation of 302 large, page 12 lists the roof peak elevations of 301 large and 303 large. But if we also look at the roof peak of 302, we have 301 large, the house on the right, being at 1318.95. 302, 1319.91, which is about almost a meter higher than 302, 9.96 meters. And 303, the roof height is 1319.35, which is 56, which means 302 will be 56 centimeters higher than 303. So higher than both houses. Now the values for those, the height of the roofs on either side, like 301 and 302, or 301 and 303 have been surveyed by a professional land surveyor who I know and trust, and I believe those numbers to be correct. Okay, on page 13, if we could go to page 13, please. Okay, page 13. Is that page 13?
Yes.
Oh yeah, on page 13, the maximum allowed building height, and this is the page that was submitted by the applicant. On page 13, the maximum allowed building height, which has been calculated and agreed to of being about 6.31 meters, is not shown on the elevations. A line at about 6.5 meters, which is about where that blue dotted line is, the envelope line, if that could be pointed out. Yeah, that line there, a line purported to be the building envelope line is shown and is easily assumed to indicate the maximum allowed building height. Thus, the full extent of the proposed variance is not clear on this drawing, which was the drawing submitted by the applicant for his development permit. I mean, but to be fair now, the drawing is, or the maximum roof height has been shown as calculated on page 16 of the submission, which we already saw. All right, going on to my last set of points, which is variance powers of the development authority. And this is where we get into kind of hazy ideas of, you know, what should be considered in a roof height variance or not. And we disagree with the staff on this, the planning staff on this. We believe that the staff report is erred in A, the calculation of building height by using the value of 1319.8 instead of 1319.91, which was previously discussed. And B, the application of land use bylaw sections 1.14.1.1 and 1.14.1.3. And those are, that's the section that talks about granting variances. So we'll go straight to point B because we've hashed over point A already. Okay, so LUB section 1.14.1.1 states that the development authority may grant a variance to building height, but only if two conditions are both met. First condition, and I quote, the variance provides a community or neighborhood benefit. And the second condition, the proposed development would not materially interfere with or affect the use, enjoyment, safety, aesthetics, or value of neighboring properties. as Mr. Bjorgi pointed out already. We believe that neither condition is met in this case. And remember, only one of those conditions, if only one of those conditions is not met, then the variance should not be granted. The staff report states that the variance will lead to encouraging energy efficient upgrades through passive solar design. This is a very weak argument. Any benefit from the variance will be to the applicant, not the community or neighborhood. Encouragement of green build homes is commendable, but it should be done through incentives, which are alluded to in the green build section of the bylaw, and education. The staff report, going on to point B, the staff report implies that because the staff did not receive any feedback from adjacent residents during the 10-day notification or notice of application period, that this clause could be ignored. As was explained to Mr. Bjorgi, and when we submitted our appeal notice, we had various discussions with the applicant long before he submitted any development application. Like, we're talking 2 years ago. And we were under the impression that he knew we would not object to his plans unless the building were to exceed the maximum allowed building height. We assumed that he would have submitted plans in accordance with this. Therefore, we were lax, I suppose, on submitting an objection sooner than the town staff would like, but that's our reason. We just assumed from our previous discussions that he would not be going over the building height. We are citing this clause because the almost 2-foot variance will significantly impact our southerly views and thus the value of our property. So, as noted, if either one of the above arguments is accepted, the variance should be denied per LUB section 1.14.1.1. Now, going on to another section there, LUB section 1.14.0.1 provides that a variance may be applied if site conditions restrain reasonable development. Now, so the question is, what are site conditions, and is reasonable development being restrained? The staff report states that administration considers the existing building, the one on 302 Larch, to be a site condition, which limits the construction of a second-story addition. In our opinion, this is not valid reasoning because the manufactured home residential zone was not intended for two-story homes. It was intended, and I quote, for manufactured dwellings and other uses compatible with low-density residential development. Now, when you take that statement from the SUB and add to that the low height allowance, it is our opinion that the MHR zone is intended for bungalows, not two-story buildings. Now, granted, there are some two-story buildings, but as talked about before, they're basically slab on grade with a low pitch roof. And so they fit under the maximum height allowance. Therefore, the variance cannot be justified based on the inability to build a second-story addition. So in summary, we believe that this appeal should be we believe that this our appeal should be granted for the following reasons. The maximum allowed building height was calculated incorrectly. The applicant has misleading text and diagrams in his development permit application. The development authority has failed to find sufficient reasons to grant the variance as per LUB section 1.14. The proposed variance would allow a development that is not in conformance with the intent of the MHR zoning, and our southerly views and the value of our property will be negatively affected. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Staliker. Thank you very much. Questions of Mr. and Mrs. Staliker? Board members? Maybe I could start with just the first one. I never did see a good in the package, a plot plan showing how like as I look at the plot plan, I see that Mr. Stalker, you folks have windows toward the back of your building that look like view windows. But I couldn't tell whether the position of the new building is forward of those windows, blocking those windows, or just how the orientation is such that it's going to really drastically affect your view. And I say that secondly because also I know on the plot plan, the building location itself is quite far, angles quite far away from your building. And so I'm just kind of wanting to know what your views on that is.
Well, our normal view of out the dining room and the living room will be affected by the new building. If we look out towards the back, it won't be.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. All right. Mr. Scott, any questions?
Yes, a follow-up to that. So right now, from what I hear is that your dining room window and your living room window look
Same
into the look into the current house. Is that it?
Yeah. Yes. It sort of looks out towards the back end of the current house.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's looking into that house.
Well, it looks
Then-
over the top of it towards the mountains.
Okay, and the reason for that is because you are at least 4 feet higher, your ground level, or your main level of your house is 4 feet higher than your neighbor. Is that what I'm hearing?
The main level of our house is about 2 feet higher or so than 302. The 302 has a basement that sticks out of the ground, I don't know, approximately 2 feet or so. Our basement sticks out of the ground about 4 feet.
Okay,
So we're a little bit higher, but we're looking uphill. We're looking uphill over his roof to the mountains.
okay,
And
thank you.
Just to clarify that again, Mr. Stalker, is the back of his home past your window or?
It's right in front.
No, if we're standing perpendicular to the wall with the window on it, and we look out the middle of the window, we're looking approximately at the back end of his house.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Scott, anything further? Ms. Mara?
Oops. Thank you, Chair, Mr. Locke. I was just looking at the garage that's on the property. That is on the 302 property, correct?
Yeah, they have a
And-
garage close to our house. Yeah.
Okay, and do we know the approximate height of that? Do you have I didn't see it in any of the drawings, and I'm just looking at on page 9 of the in the package. Does it come forward in front of your house also, or am I looking from the above view? It's just deceiving of how it comes, how much forward it comes in front of your window.
Well, we don't worry about it. I'm sure the garage is built to the LUB, and
But
I mean it's
yeah,
pretty low. I mean, it sort of blocks our view a bit, but it's lower than the existing house.
I was just wondering if it was
It's fine.
forward to your home. Like it was covering, like it was.
Yeah,
Not necessarily interfering, but where it was placed in relation to the window that we see that our chair has spoke to.
Oh, it's to the back. It would be to our left or towards the back of our house.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't
But not
interfere.
where,
It
Not
doesn't.
with the
It doesn't
interfere.
interfere. It doesn't interfere. no.
That's what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's it, Ms. Mara, that's it? That's, yeah, that's.
My apologies. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I'd just be interested in your views on the key tests that this board has to apply in connection with the variance, which is different than the tests that the development officer has to apply. For this board, we have to determine whether that variance, proposed variance, would unduly interfere with the amenities of the neighborhood or materially interfere with or affect the use, enjoyment, or value of neighboring parcels of land. So you have spoken to some degree about the test that was applicable to the development officer, but as I've just read out, our test is different. And that's the test that we have to legally apply. Happy to read that to you again, but that's what
Yeah,
I
what
need.
page is that on? Sorry.
It's actually, that is in the, that's section 687, sub 3, sub D of the Municipal Government Act. It's not in the bylaw itself. So we apply a test in the Municipal Government Act.
I think it's in the package that was sent out to Mr. Bjorgi. Could probably point us to the right page. It was in his introduction, if I'm not mistaken.
You're correct. Well, it's on page 17 of the presentation of the package.
Oh, there we are. Is that the part that says section 687?
Yeah, 687, 3C and D. So the key that we need to focus on is the
Oh,
second
right, there it
bullet.
is.
And that those are the words that we will be applying.
Yeah, well, in our opinion, it materially interferes with the enjoyment and value of our property.
And the enjoyment being what
Views.
exactly? The view?
Yeah.
And when you say that would affect the value, do you have any?
No, I don't have a
any
number.
evidence on that, or?
Well, normally homes with a nice view are worth more than homes with a lousy view. I don't have any number though.
Right.
And that window is a big part of our home. It's, we spend a lot of time looking out that window at the mountains, and we feel that having a roof height that high, our view will be affected, and that therefore our enjoyment of that view.
So one question I have is if there were no variance, but they went up to the maximum height, would your view still be affected?
It would be, but it is allowed. So
Our view would be affected, but keep in mind that by my calculation, the variance is about a 2-foot height difference from what would be allowed. And 2 feet is going to make a huge difference in our view of the mountains. We as I told the applicant, I don't know, I thought we'd made clear to the applicant that if he had no height variance, how are we going to object anyhow? But we can't object and could go for it and I'd be quite happy, like no problem. We're objecting because of the variance, and that 2 feet is a lot.
And when you say that 2 feet, is that including your view that it should include the eaves?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're talking just approximately, like it's approximately 2 feet, like 56 centimeters, right? Which is a little under 2 feet, but.
Okay, and that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bell, and thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker. Those are all the questions of the board. So I take it there are no others speaking in favor of your appeal. You are the sole persons, and I don't believe there is any further correspondence from others in favor of the appeal. Could I verify that as correct, Ms. Stewart?
Through the chair, yes, there are no submissions in support of the subject appeal, and there's no other speaking in support of the subject appeal.
So with that, then, Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker, we could ask you to retire, and we will ask Mr. Spinner if he will present on behalf of the applicant.
Can I make just one last tidy little item? Is that what I presented is going to be available, it is already available to you as a PDF.
Have you provided it to the board?
Yes, yes.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just did that today. Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so over to you, Mr. Spinner. I wonder if you may present your material on this matter.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks, Paul and Noah, for the presentation. So we started with this design, and we've gone through a lot of design iterations because it's a challenging lot to make it work. So the original design that we proposed was actually even higher, and I'd like to point out that the original notice of decision that was submitted was for 10%, and we're aware that our neighbors were not here, and they were surprised by this application, and I think this is misleading because in our view it is not a 10% variance. So we'll just walk you through our letter. And I agree with Paul. It is a bit misleading, the land use bylaw, because there's different points and different calculations, and there have been changes over the last months and years. But what and we're not going through the whole calculation again. You can read it up in your own time in our submission. But what I do want to point out that in the land use bylaw, in the MHR residential district, it says in 3.1536 that the maximum building height shall be 6.5 meters measured from grade. And the measure from grade is very important because in none of the other districts does it say it's measured from grade. So to us, that implies that whether the H-max formula is needed or not, it should be applied from grade and not from the H-max. So therefore, we supplied the two calculations. So we supplied the calculation with this 6.8, which is, sorry, we applied this a calculation where we understand, but bylaw district, the ground is labeled as 0, and therefore the maximum height is 6.5 meters. In our view, the 6.8 meters to the outside of the building envelope, excluding the eaves, implies a 4.6% variance. The other calculation will be with the H-max, and that's similar to what Eric Bjorgis has, is at 7.8%, and we just have a little bit of a rounding difference. It's important to note that we would have been able to make a much bigger second story. I do want to point out the floor plan and the location of the property. And this is a little outdated, but this is our property. The sunroom has been replaced. So I'm just switching to Google Maps here quickly. So this is our existing addition, and then, oh, damn.
Yeah, we're not able to see what.
Okay, all right. A little glitch here.
On that screen.
Okay. Okay, let's stop sharing quickly here. All right, so this is the subject property, 302, and this is the appellant's property. Yeah, what I want to point out is the location and the difference. Now, this is a little outdated, but I basically want to show you that the appellant's windows are here. And as I mentioned, if they look out perpendicular or straight after the house, it would not be in view of the new build. Obviously, if they're looking to the right, the alteration and the height they were applying for does inflict. But because the subject part of the house that we're raising is in the middle of the property, and we did that intentionally in order to minimize the impact from our neighbors to a minimum. As I said before, we were reducing it to the maximum we could in order to get our solar gain, but not impact the view from the neighbors. And it is our opinion that the building is quite far away from the neighbors. It will impact their view minimally, especially because this building at 301 is already 2-story and almost at the maximum height. So I'll go back to the ladder. Sorry, wrong one. All right, thanks for your patience. Yeah, so this is to the height. We angled the roof back, in order to get clear story heights, because it's crucial with anything we do that we allow the solar gain. So what we actually do for all our projects, we do an energy model calculation, and those windows up high on the south are crucial for that solar gain. So we're getting a little bit more roof height, and a minor variance of 4.6% in our opinion. It gives us a great benefit and reduces our annual heating demand. And this is given because the adjacent house and 301 is quite tall. So we're not, and it's almost to the setback. So is ours. So we're not able to build all the way to the south of the building property. So therefore we're only building half of the house, raise that up. So we have the setback, and so we're able to implement windows and actually have some sunlight in our house because of the location and the adjacent property, which are overtowering our building. We don't have any direct sunlight from either sides of the building. So this is the existing that we have. So our only option to get sunlight is with this proposal that we have submitted for. We don't have. We don't have to go through all these points. We really. It's like a modest renovation or a modest alteration in our opinion. If you look at the existing situation you see that either house are overtowering. The one on the right, 301, is a 2-story building with a on grade. Here is the subject property, and you see on the left the appellant's property and just a very tall main level. And what we're proposing is to basically keep this right-hand side pretty low. We're actually having solar PV panels on the back side of the house. So we have an area where we have southern facing roof for solar panels, but then the upper roof needs to be tilted the other way. So in order to harness its solar gain. Yeah, so as you see, quite a bit of thought went into this design, and we actually had submitted it a while ago and pre-approved. Just the concept that was 2 years ago, but with different people at the planning department. So I understand this is irrelevant. But yeah, what we're also doing is a retrofit, and so we obviously have a modular at home, and what we did already on the main floor, we did an alteration and we added insulation to the outside. We added wood fiber insulation and last fall, and it immensely reduced our annual heating demand. So our goal is to reduce the carbon footprint and the greenhouse gas emissions. And because of the work we do, we would argue this is community benefit because it does lower the emissions, and it is an example project. We're showing other people what's possible and how to build better and how to harness the power of the sun and retain that heat by insulating better. Right, and also because we are building better and the insulation in the roof is thicker in order to meet better heat insulation values. So that means we have to have a thicker roof for more insulation. So I would take this into consideration as well, because the interior living height will be less due to more insulation. We did for our property, we did the 3D design and a solar study just in the 3D. We haven't reported it, therefore we have not submitted it. But that's a key tool in our design process to evaluate whether we have the solar gain in the winter during the lowest day in the year, and then that we still have the shading during the summer months. So we have done the study for our place, but we have not submitted with this report. Another reason we also decided to do a retrofit and not build from scratch, well, it's twofold. First is cost, and second is to reduce the waste material. Our goal is to build sustainable and not bring everything to the landfill and start fresh from scratch. So it may take a little longer to renovate, but our goal is to renovate thoughtfully and energy efficiently and in a sustainable way in order not to increase the landfill load. Yeah, it is our intent to build modest, and we do believe this design fits into the neighborhood. I mean, it's a mix of different designs anyway, so I don't think there is a strong language in this district. And yeah, I would really point down to the land use bylaw, section 3.15.3.6. Building height shall be 6.5 meters measured from grade, and therefore imply this as a variance of 4.6. And we are in favor of this design as approved by the planning department to be approved by the SDAB. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Spinner. Questions of the board? Maybe while they're thinking about it, Mr. Spinner, I could ask you the question. I noticed on page 9, you show that interesting little profile picture of the 3 dwellings. And then on page 13, there is a sort of a plan view of the buildings. Does the building on page 9 really reflect the height difference? I mean, it seemed to me the appellant was concerned that that didn't really represent what was going to happen, because he felt that the roof line of the proposed design was going to be up higher, more along the height lines of the building beside it. That it's a 2-story. Does that really accurately describe what it's going to look like? What you show there on 6?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so it does look like the subject property 302 is a little setback, which it is from 2 properties. But you understand this is some sort of a Photoshop, and it may not be totally accurate.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't want this to be misleading. The top of 302 of our property will be taller, but it is setback as well. So this, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Scott, any questions? You're muted, I think, Mr. Scott.
Yeah, I am.
There you go.
I'm just looking at if this was turned down and you had to take off that lower, I imagine what you would end up having to do is change the slope on your roof. Is that what you would have to do to get under the height variance? Is that possible?
Well, yeah, I'm just not a bad fan of a flat roof. But I guess on the other hand, if it were a flat roof, it would be a rooftop patio, and we could utilize this as for our enjoyment. So I haven't thought of that actually, but I'm in favor of a sloped roof. Just for longevity. And quite frankly, we started this design before the land use bylaw changed. And at that time, flat roofs were not desired or permitted.
Okay.
Just following up on that point, Mr. Spinner, as I look at the drawing on page 13 of 56, 6.5 meters is, as you pointed out earlier, someone pointed out earlier, that light aquamarine color dashed line is probably the highest level. It looks like that could provide some nominal slope to you, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so okay, so I'm looking at page 56.
13 of 56, page
Okay.
13.
So, excuse me, I didn't get your question.
So I'm looking at that upper left front elevation, and you see the aquamarine colored line there that says highest conditioned space, which is approximately 6.5 meters from grade. You see that?
Yes.
And if in fact you had to comply in response to Mr. Scott's question, that would bring that point at the far right of the roof down to the blue line, which would still allow for a small, modest slope.
Yes, it could, but then if we're may I share my screen again?
Sure.
Yeah, so it would allow for a modest slope for architectural integrity, ideally, we would have the same slope here as in that entrance roof that's existing already. And as you can see here on the right, those windows, the more we drop the top of the roof, the smaller those windows get. And yeah, because those windows are crucial for our solar gain, because all the windows we have on the south are here. And if you're familiar with passive house design principles, solar exposure to the south is critical and the key component of passive house design principles, which we just don't have in our case. So therefore, a little bit more height goes a long way.
I understand that point. Thank you. Yeah, I understand that point. Okay, back to you then, Mr. Scott. Sorry for the interruption. Mr. Scott is complete. Ms. Mara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I was sort of looking and asking or looking to ask questions similar to that. When you were speaking about the windows, are they the windows that are sort of like the smaller ones that are way up the top of a wall? Is there any possibility of lowering those windows also? The ones that we were just talking about.
Right.
Or making them bigger or?
Well, you can always make them smaller, but the smaller window is, the less the solar gain is, and the more you have a frame, so the less efficient they are. So lowering, not much, because we have the roof below. So if you look on the page 13 again, I think.
Yeah.
So if we're lowering those windows, then the problem is we're getting close to the roof below.
Okay.
And that's just not good from a building perspective.
Thank you for answering that.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bell.
No questions from me.
Okay. Mr. Spinner, did you or your the person you were working with, did they at all consider or want to look at the sun angle study or such that it might affect your neighbors?
Yeah, that's a good question. At the point we did the sun study, we did solely for 302 and not the subject property. But because we were interested in the heights of the adjacent properties, we had the surveyor come out and survey the neighboring property. So we do have those now, and that's how we mocked up the 3D model very roughly with the adjacent houses. So yeah, if desired, we could submit that sun study.
So do you have any idea of the impact that this will have on the neighbors in terms of their sun? How much sun they get in a day?
Yeah, not at this point, but yeah, not at this point.
Okay.
But because the subject property is very close to the property line and ours is tilted away, like the space between the top of the roof and their bay window, kitchen window is quite far. So I'd be surprised if it impacts the sun. So I doubt it does. I think it more so impacts the views.
Okay, and did you have a view on the appellate's position on whether the eave height is considered to be at the maximum height versus back where you and the development officer thought it was? Do you have a view on that? Because it does clearly set out in the land use bylaw,
right,
as pointed out by the appellate, that we have Mr. Stoliker and Mrs. Stoliker, that we have, the eaves maybe should be included.
Yeah, my opinion is the same as Mr. Bjorgi is with the town of Canmore. And just simply because we've gone through many projects where the eaves is always excluded from the building envelope in other projects that we design. And so therefore that's the opinion we took here as well. And so that's how we interpret it. And so does the planning department.
Can you point us to where in the land use bylaw that flexibility is allowed? Or that interpretation is the correct one as compared to the interpretation Mr. Stoliker pointed us
Right.
to?
Yeah, not on top of my head, but I can follow up on that if you'd like.
Mr. Stoliker pointed out that in the land use bylaw, I think it was 1.3 or 13, I think it was. For the building height, there's a definition, and the definition does not exclude any eave. And so would be interested in knowing why it is that the eave should not be included. So we might have to get Mr. Bjorga back just to answer that question, I think, because I didn't think to ask it at that moment. Anyhow, I think that concludes our questions for you, Mr. Spinner. So we'll let you stand down.
Yeah, so again, I would just quickly to round up this eave, I would also point out to 2.4.3.1 as Mr. Stoliker did earlier. Yeah, and those are already cantilevers. And then I will point out to Eric Bjorgi to take me up on that.
So I'm looking at 2.4.3.1. And what am I looking for there that will give me this clarity?
Well, yeah, so it shows you how far you can set back, but yeah, so that's or how much the cantilever or eave or whatever can project.
That doesn't help me with the maximum height, though, does it?
Right. Yeah, I see the confusion for sure.
So if I go back to the definition of what the maximum height should be, I think I'm stuck with the definition of the maximum height.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for pointing us in those directions. Thanks very much.
Yeah, of course. Thank
We
you.
can step down now, and I think we will. I don't think there's anyone else speaking for the applicant in this case. So I think we can go directly then to okay, hang on, I gotta go back here. The closing remarks. And so now we would give the opportunity to although I was just on a point of order, I still want to know from Mr. Bjorga. I wonder if Mr. Bjorga is still with us, if he could help us really come back in and clarify that point. Ms. Stewart, are we allowed to do that?
Through the chair, he would mention that in the closing remarks.
Okay, that works. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so then we will move to the closing remarks. And so Mr. Stoliker and Ms. Stoliker, we'll start with yourself. You've heard both the development officer and you've heard the applicant and their views and their positions. Would you like to have any closing remarks on your application at this point in time on your appeal? Based on anything you've heard? Are you there?
Yeah, sorry, we're a little slow at the gun there.
There we are.
Yeah, just trying to make a few notes here. We concur with Mr. Sinner that it's not the sun that we're concerned about, it's the views. So we agree on that.
Thank you.
And we believe that we want to emphasize that we believe that it's the mountains that are going to obscure his solar his solar rays coming in through his clear story windows. And that's going to have the biggest effect on, you know, whether he's going to get any sunlight on there or not, right? And we don't believe that his neighboring roof is going to be a big effect for him. In fact, the line he shows on that page 13, the dashed line that goes through the middle of those clear story windows, that's the line, that's the height of the neighbor's roof. So right now, those proposed clear story windows, the approximate center of them is on a horizontal plane with the roof of 301 Larch. So assuming, you know, thinking about the sun being a lot higher than that roof and it's up in the sky, he's going to get a lot of sunlight coming through those windows if the mountains aren't in the way. And if he lowers the windows, he's still, I think, going to get quite a bit of sun coming through there. And if he really wants this thing, he needs to do a proper sun study to prove all that. But at this time, I don't think he's proved it. He's kind of making assumptions, and he's making assumptions about the effect on our house too. And that's, in my opinion, isn't good enough. I don't know. You got anything else? No. I think that's about it. Oh, yeah. I mean, I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your points on the method of care, or the point of the roof, that it has to be considered the roof height. And I hope that administration looks at that closely. And if they have been calculating it, in my mind, the wrong way, they will change their method of calculation to clear that up for everybody. And one more point that Mr. Sinner made about the 6.5 meter above grade roof height. He kept alluding to that. Unfortunately, that's his lack of inexperience with the town bylaw and how maximum roof heights are calculated. I've been working with this bylaw for years, and that the number that's given in the section 3, where it's the different zoning, that's just a base number that you use to start calculating the maximum roof height. I don't have anything else. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stoliker. Mrs. Stoliker, thank you too. With that in mind, then we'll get you to stand. Questions of the board. The board have any questions of the Stolikers with respect to their closing remarks? Thank you. That then concludes your portion. Then thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker. We'll now move to the applicant for his closing remarks and questions of the board. Mr. Spinner.
Yes. Yeah, I guess not much to add. We was there in a disagreement about height with the appellant. So thanks for the board to clear the air. Yeah, I think an alternative option, although we don't want to pursue that because I think it would be worse for the appellant, is to do a flat roof and make a rooftop terrace, which we would be allowed by the land use bylaw. It's not our preferred option, but if this would be turned down, I think that would be a logical next step. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions of the board members? No. Mr. Scott, no. Thank you very much. That concludes your remarks, Mr. Spinner. Does the town staff have any closing remarks? Mr. Bjorga.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few closing points to cover that were raised in the discussion today. So I'll start with this question about the eaves. Mr. Stoliker is correct in following the kind of thread of reasoning here. The sections that he's quoted of the land use bylaw are the very ones that we use to make that interpretation. Specifically 2.8.4.1 of the land use bylaw states that any of the building elements which are listed in table 2.4-1 are excluded from, they may project beyond the building envelope. And while he's correct, that table, that 2.4-1 talks about projections into yard setbacks. Our department standard interpretation of that is that it applies to those elements such as eaves, chimneys, decks, other things that are allowed to project, that they are permitted beyond the building envelope, whether it's the side of the envelope or the top of the envelope. I do take his point on where he's coming from with that argument, but that has been our department's interpretation of that regulation. Would just point out either way, even if you do include the eaves in your calculation, of course it increases the magnitude of the variance that's being requested, but it is within the 10% that a development officer can grant either way. Addressing the variance criteria, and specifically whether it would unduly and materially interfere, I think it's clear that any addition to this to 302 Larch will interfere with the neighbor's views. The question is whether the extra height that's being requested in this case will unduly or materially interfere. Obviously, the appellants know their home and their views better than anybody, but I'd suggest we take into consideration what could be proposed under a different development scenario, which would be a full height gable, let's say, that was built at right at the minimum setback. So I think it's which could potentially have a significant impact on the views, perhaps comparable to what's being proposed today. So in that view, and looking at where the addition is located on the site, which minimizes the impact of the addition, our view is that the impact compared to other development scenarios is marginal, rather than undue and material. And taking into consideration the energy efficiency objectives that the applicant has in this dwelling, we believe it is justified and has rationale behind it. Addressing the purpose of the MHR district and this question of bungalow versus two-story dwellings, I would suggest that if two-story dwellings are possible within the maximum height in the district, they are permissible. And from what we've seen today, the applicant is very close to being in compliance with the maximum height, and that 6.5 meters is a sufficient height for certain two-story designs. Also want to clarify the point that Mr. Spinner was mentioning on the 6.5 meters measured from grade versus the number that you get when you apply the formulas in section 2.8, which is 6.3 meters. And granted, the wording in the MHR district is slightly different. Not every district says measured from grade. However, that's, in our view, that does not change the intent that every district has to apply either the HMAX or the building envelope formulas and calculations to come up with what the actual maximum building height is on a particular lot. And that concludes my closing remarks.
Thank you. Board members, questions of Mr. Bjorga? None from Mr. Bell? Mr. Scott? None from Mr. Scott. Ms. Mara? Mr. Bjorga, thank you very much for your help. That was great. Good coverage. Thank you. I now then just want to get Mr. and Mrs. Stoliker back on the screen for a moment. I just want to ask you folks if you feel that the hearing today has given you adequate opportunity to put your case forward and it was a fair hearing.
Yeah, I think we both feel that it was a fair hearing and we've said what we need to say. And I appreciate everybody's thoughtful input.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. We'll then move over to Mr. Spinner and ask the same question of him. Mr. Spinner, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, thanks very much for the process.
You've had an adequate opportunity to put your case forward, and
yes, definitely.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, this hearing then is now concluded. In accordance with provincial legislation, we will render a written decision within 15 days, and no decision is binding until the board issues that written decision. So I move that the board adjourn the hearing of today's date. All those in favor? Thank you.